Well, all right. Crystal Renaud Day, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. Good to be with you again.
Yeah, you're becoming quite the regular. In fact, we actually had you on earlier this year. We released a podcast that you did with us in January, where you had released some new research on why women view porn, and so that's been a really popular podcast because, quite honestly, there's not a ton of research out there around that topic.
Mm-hmm.
So, before we dive into what we're going to talk about today, can you share with us anything else that maybe has come out of that research, or just have there been some aha moments for some women that have seen that and realized that maybe they're not alone in this battle?
I think with the survey and with the statistics we were able to collect, we're seeing every day somebody's downloading that material. Whether they're downloading the statistics, wanting to learn more. I think that really is for me. That I think that almost was the end goal, was to get people interested in women's side of recovery and addiction, and to give them something tangible that they could look at and say, well, these are real people, these are real numbers. They're not just numbers, they're real people, real women, and really encourage them to do more with that, to do something about it, be trained up in it. And I think for me personally, what came out of it was me offering a training. From those surveys, I was able to train over 50 women from around the country, around the world, in how to help women in recovery, and walk women through that recovery journey. And that's actually available for download now. Anybody can take that training anytime. And then we use a lot of the stats in that training just to kind of show the progression over time, and where we're at just culturally. But that was really the coolest part for me, was be able to do that training and then to offer that.
That is cool. So we'll certainly give website information and stuff later, but where could anybody go to download that research?
Yeah, the research and the training are both at sherecovery.com, right there under, I think it's under For Helpers tab. It's a place you can just download.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're going to talk about something that you've done before, and it's this online virtual summit. And but I want to kind of lay the groundwork for that because it's not like you're brand new to this space of ministry to women. It's not like this was just sort of a random happenstance thing that you did with this summit. Um, you've got a lot of experience in this field of really helping women who are struggling with unwanted sexual behaviors, especially pornography. Can you talk a little bit about why you do what you do and why the work that you do for women is so important?
You and I have been in this work, I want to say, about the same amount of time, about
That
14,
was
15.
2003 is when I
Yeah.
started to be
So,
broken.
I mean, I think I was 2006. And I think it's interesting because we know people personally in this field who have burned out, fallen away, don't do it anymore. In fact, have turned their backs on it. And that's, of course, very sad. I don't really know why I'm still standing here, other than it's just such a passion area of mine, and God has really just given me that calling on my life to come alongside women and help them to find that the wholeness that I've personally experienced. And maybe that's part of it because it was personal for me. Having been exposed to porn at the age of 10, having an addiction through the age of 19, finding recovery, finding healing, not just from the behavior, but what was underneath that behavior was so important. Um, it wasn't what I planned to do with my life. I'm thinking about this. I was talking to my husband a few months or weeks ago, and I was like, I've been talking about porn for 15 years. It's like, it's one of those things like, I didn't talk about porn my whole life, until 15 years ago. And so it's like, but that's what I talk about now. And it's just something that, um, it's funny almost because like nothing, I'm not ashamed to have any conversation now because I've heard everything, seen everything. And but what keeps me going, I think, truthfully, is seeing women set free. Not just set free from the addiction or behavior, but set free from the shame, set free from the isolation, set free from the feelings that I'm alone. And so, even if it's just that, even if it's just understanding you're not alone, I think is actually a really motivating factor in all of this. But certainly, it's seeing them set free and hearing the stories and the victories along the way.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I think it's the stories, right? It's the stories that really impact us, and maybe without sharing any kind of details, are there any stories that just are such highlights for you over the years where you just thought, well, I don't know if this could, I don't know. I mean, even what I've seen God do in my own life, and even the hope that I have, I don't know if this person necessarily is going to be set free, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, their lives been transformed.
There's certain women who I've worked with for years, and and I've always said that you have to be ready. I like to use the Bible story of just the pool of Bethesda and the invalid man, right, where he's like making a lot of excuses for why he can't get to the healing pool. No one ever helps me in. It's always stirring before I get there, whatever it might be. And Jesus is just like, get up and walk. Like, do you want to be well? Get up and walk. And part of my approach has always kind of been a little bit harsh because it's just, I know what it's like to be in addiction. I know what it's like to make excuses. I know what it's like to kind of play the game, so to speak, and just pick up what you've surrendered 1,000 times. But I think one story in particular, this woman, came to me with a multi-factored addiction. It wasn't just porn; it was having affairs with her husband and just other things. And it just seemed like she would be okay for a little while and just fall back into it. Be okay for a little while, fall back. Just very cyclical. Just we know what addiction is, a cycle, and it's habitual. And in fact, and she had been at like Marnie's stuff too. Like she gone to her intensives and things like that, and just nothing seemed to click. But she has this husband. It's to me it's so much like Hagar and Hosea. Like it's just he kept taking her back, kept forgiving her, kept loving her, showing her the love of Christ. Which even I would say to her, you have a sainted husband. Like I would say this is a man who clearly is just following the Lord. He sees something in you that's possible. That you're going to overcome this. And I recently heard from her again, and basically she's just hit her 1 year sober, which never thought that'd be possible. It was always a month or 2 months, but never a year. And she really does, at this point, feel like she has overcome the threshold, like she's pushed beyond that barrier that kept seeming to come in front of her. And somebody recently wrote a song about her too, and her story called "Daughter." And it's just you can just see her just coming into this wholeness in Christ and really knowing her identity in Him, and that nothing outside of Him can really fully satisfy her, including her husband. It's one of
Mm.
those things like you really have to get to that surrendered place of understanding that. And I really see that in her, and it's a really encouraging and powerful thing just to witness.
That is so good. Yeah, I think sometimes it's those kind of stories that provide a little bit of an anchor for us who've been in this space for a
Mhm.
long time, because you can also have a lot of just dry spells where it
Yeah,
can feel like, whew, this is hard work, and it feels
yeah,
like you're drowning, and it feels like there's just you wonder if anything good is happening in the ministry. But I
right.
do want to talk about something that is good, and that is your She Summit. So, can you tell us, first of all, what the summit is?
hmm Yeah, the She Virtual Recovery Summit, which is a lot to say. I just call it She Summit to be easy. It really is just an opportunity for women who are struggling, including teen girls, who are struggling to come to this virtual event. It's 5 days, and it's really just 5 days of stories, expertise, advice, hope for recovery, spoken from other women who have been where they are. Either they are in this work themselves in some fashion, like Jessica Harris, or if they're just a woman with a story, which is again still very powerful. being able to share those stories, that expertise, that hope over the course of that week. It really is a time for them to learn and to grow, and to hopefully at some point in that week and surrender to the process of recovery. But it really is a unique space because it's created just for women and by women for women who are struggling. It's also opportunity for the helper to come. So counselors and pastors and coaches and lay leaders, anybody who wants to help women or understand the issue of female porn addiction or sexual unwanted sexual behavior, to learn and to take into practice what they can do to help others.
Yeah, now you mentioned even teenagers. So what is kind of the age cutoff?
Well, I mean, we tend to say 13. I think in certain terms of appropriateness, I would say 15, 16. But we understand that the age of addiction, age of struggle is getting younger and younger and younger. And so certainly if somebody who's younger than that finds the summit and registers for it, certainly we can't stop them from participating. But if you're a parent and you have like a 12-year-old or 11-year-old, even a 10-year-old, there's going to be things in that that could help her, but certainly we want you to be watching it with her and having that conversation and dialogue.
So now, it seems obvious that this is something that's, you said it's by women for women, but who can attend or who can like register for the summit? I mean, would it be open to others in this space of ministry or leaders or whatever? Like, who could benefit from this summit?
Yeah, anybody can benefit really. If you're a man who's struggling, you think you might be helped by the content. Certainly, you could register. There may be some interactive moments where you can chat and have conversations or meet up virtually via Zoom. We wouldn't recommend men go to that. In fact, you'd be kicked out of those types of sessions. But men can join. But really, if you're talking about who is this for, it's for the woman who struggles or the one who wants to help her. So it's
Yeah.
parents, it's church leaders, pastors, counselors, coaches. But really, it's focused in on the woman who is struggling.
Yeah. So, share with us some of the topics that one could expect to hear
Yeah.
at the summit.
The nice thing about the summit is we like to make it really diverse in the types of things we're talking about. Because we understand that porn use and unwanted sexual behavior, that's just behavior, right? So we're trying to talk about the other factors that might be a part of that. And so we're talking about trauma, mental health. We're talking about healing from those things. We're talking about attachment styles. We're talking about accountability. What does that look like? We're talking about the recovery process. What does it actually look like? Not just behaviorally, but emotionally and physically and spiritually. Talking about the faith, talking about the church's role in all of this. We're talking about, really any type of related topic to this area. We're going to be covering it in some fashion.
Yeah, now I already know that there's a few things that you just mentioned in that list that if somebody has had like zero connection with like a recovery space or a
Mm-hmm.
counseling session or whatever, they're going to be going, whoa, 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 wait a second, time out. What are you talking about? Attachment styles, or you
Yeah.
talking about a recovery process or accountability? Can we just take a little bit of time? I mean, we're not doing the whole summit right here, right? But could you maybe describe some of those? Let's start with maybe the recovery process. First of all, the fact that recovery is a process rather than like, hey, I enter recovery and boom, I get my little formula and then I'm done. Can you kind of paint a picture for what can be expected in the recovery process?
Yeah. So this year's summit, we're actually, because we're trying to release it or have it be held in conjunction with the release of my next book, we're going to be trying to formulate the summit around the 5 steps outlined in my book. And that would be the renewed version of my original book, Dirty Girls Come Clean. And in that book, we have 5 steps: surrender, confession, accountability, responsibility, and sharing. And so each day of the summit this year is going to be one of those steps. So Monday, or let's say Monday, is going to be surrender. And so most of the topics on day one are going to be about surrendering. And surrendering looks like not just, it can be surrendering your behavior, it can be surrendering to God, we're surrendering to accountability, we're surrendering to going to counseling, surrendering to, there can be lots of things that we're surrendering to, or that we're surrendering physically, right? So it's not just like surrendering to something, but surrendering something as well. And sometimes when we're, not sometimes, but everybody who has an addiction will have at some point have to surrender
Mm.
to their powerlessness and
That's kind of
say,
that breaking point,
it's
right?
the
Yeah.
breaking point. Yeah. They'll have to surrender to that, to their powerlessness. This is, if I could have overcome this by myself, I would have by now. And that's really kind of the whole mantra of addiction recovery anyway, is the powerlessness of it. But because it's a faith-based summit, we're talking about the powerlessness of ourselves, but the power of God to
Mhm.
overcome, right? So there's both that surrendering to the powerlessness, and then surrender to the most powerful, the one
Mm.
in who can sustain, the one who can heal, the one who can restore, and not just restore but redeem the time. And so day one's gonna be about surrender. Day two would be confession, which is looking at what does confession look like. Confession is not just necessarily some like to someone, but confession could also be like making the decision to go to counseling and sharing your story with a counselor, digging deeper into your story, your trauma, your background, the things that have happened to you that may have attributed to your struggle. And then and next day will be accountability. What does accountability look like?
Yeah, hold on just a second.
Yeah,
I want to pause on confession for a second
sure.
for two reasons. One is some people might not know that there is any distinction between surrender and confession.
Hmm.
The other thing too is, as you were saying about confession, I sometimes think about it in terms of like confession can also mean like you're testifying,
Yeah.
right? I'm giving a confession. So therefore, hey, I'm testifying to what I've done, or I'm testifying to what I'm going to do. So can you describe a little bit of just even the distinction between surrender and confession?
Yeah, surrender, you can do that without talking to a soul. And so surrender can be between you and God. It can be between yourself and, you're surrendering in a personal conversation you're having with yourself. Whereas to me, confession is about community. Confession is about speaking to someone about this, not necessarily, and then to compare it to accountability, it's also different. But confession by itself, like talking about like, confess your sins one to another so you may be saved, right? It's about confessing, it's about speaking about your struggle, maybe for the first time
Mm.
to someone, because we have lived in, so many of these ladies have lived in isolation. They have not told anybody about their struggle. Maybe they've prayed about it. Maybe that's part of the surrender part. They've prayed about it. They talked about it with God. Maybe they've told one other person, but they aren't receiving really any benefit from that kind of that confession. And so confession's about speaking. It's bringing light to darkness. Maybe for
Yeah,
the first
I was going to say
time.
that it's like the tangible act of bringing yourself into the light, right?
Yeah,
Where
yeah,
surrender, like you said, can still be this private thing,
yeah.
but and I've said it many times over the years. It's like I did surrender multiple
Thousand
times
times. Yeah,
in my
exactly.
closet,
Yeah, yeah,
but it
yeah.
wasn't until confessing in front of other people and like
Hmm.
getting into group did I mean that the power dynamics of recovery and healing and transformation changed. And
Yes, it
that's I
does.
guess where you're saying accountability comes next, right?
Yeah, accountability would have next after that, because just the person you confess to the first time may not be your accountability support. I think about for some women, a confession looks like going to a counselor, and that's the first time you're ever telling anybody about your struggle. But that counselor is not going to be your accountability partner. It's not their job to hold you accountable, really, as far as a therapist goes. You can't call them in the middle of the night and be like, I'm struggling, or you can't have coffee with them and say, let's talk about how I was struggling last night. Accountability is about relationship. It's about bringing yourself into a group, into a triad, or even just accountability partner, where you are seeking their support um, day to day. But
Well, and I think
accountability, Go ahead.
Also, and maybe you'll talk about this, accountability is one of those words that's kind of, it can be a trigger word for people in terms of like it has a negative connotation or whatever. Why is it so important then that this surrender and confession elements really are happening prior to accountability? Because
There has
what if somebody tried to do the accountability first without any surrender or confession?
I don't think it works. I think that it's like you said, there's a lot of negative connotation with being accountable, and maybe you are not ready to be held accountable, and you have to be to that place where you have surrendered. You are bringing light to darkness. You are ready to engage in the rest of the process. And part of the rest of the process is to accept accountability, not just accountability for your behavior, but the next step would be you're being accountable to how your behavior has affected other people. And so the next step would be a responsibility, which is taking responsibility for your actions. And maybe you are maybe you just like just watch porn, right? Maybe that's not hurting anybody, right? That's like kind of the idea. This isn't hurting my spouse. It's not hurting my future relationships. Not hurting anybody but me. It's just me doing it. But I have always liked to say, with responsibility, it's also being mindful of how pornography is not a victimless activity. The understanding that pornography is a human trafficking, and that you are using somebody else for your sexual pleasure, and being responsible for that behavior and making amends where you can, and that type of thing. But if you are married, you're taking responsibility for how that's affected your spouse, and all of those things. So the responsibility portion is really kind of the amends and facing, you know, maybe the bad things that have happened. And it's hard to face the bad if you haven't done the first three steps,
Yeah.
because the bad actually is a huge trigger. And so if you can, so it's about getting to that place where you can face your darkness, face the darkness that has happened. You
And
need to
I like the fact that you're
be part of that.
saying this incredibly important aspect. You mixed accountability with community, right? The fact that you're getting relational and getting community. I love the fact that you have that prior to really digging into and looking at what you've got to own and what you've
Yeah,
got to take responsibility. Because I do think sometimes we can push people too early into that ownership before they're ready,
yeah.
before they've got the network of people that say, we love you, we care for you, we want to hear your story, we want to hear the bad,
Hmm.
so that you've got a support system
Yeah,
for when you need to really be looking at what you've got to deal with.
yeah. So that's the framework there, and then ultimately it ends with sharing, with the last day or the last step. And sharing is just like it sounds like. It's sharing your story with the next right person. Doesn't have to be like you and me, where it's worldwide and we're talking, in public all the time. Because your story is sacred. It is personal to you, and only those who need to hear it should hear it. And the Lord will lead you to the right people to share that with. But really, it's don't be me, where you went through the motions of recovery and then never told a soul, you know,
Mhm.
because I basically got the responsibility, and I just stopped. I was like, I don't want to ever talk about it again. I'm healed. But part of healing continually is sharing your story, because it inspires you to keep going, really, because you're helping the next generation or the next person, to find the freedom that you've had. And that's the gospel, right? Is sharing the good news. And so you're sharing the good news of what God has done in your life through recovery. And so it's time for you to share that.
How does that final piece? Because I totally agree with you, and I think so many times that final piece is the missing piece in a lot of people's recovery
Yeah.
journey. Why is that final piece so important in terms of kind of shifting the whole vision of what recovery is really to be all about? Because isn't it easy for us to sort of keep that very self-absorbed, self-focused perspective coming in through our recovery? How does that sharing piece really shift that dynamic?
If we're honest, addiction, people who have addiction, or who we call addicts themselves, they're selfish people. I mean, I can say that because I was one. It's a lot about me and what I can get and what I need, and to fill my needs and my wants and my desires. And so part of the recovery process is really surrendering what you want and what you need, and what, into for what you actually, what you actually need and what you actually want and what is actually necessary for your life. And so I think really that sharing piece is kind of the selfless act of because it might feel good to share your story with somebody and it's beneficial for them, but really it's selfless. It's saying, I couldn't do this by myself. I couldn't do this alone. And so I'm going to share my story so that somebody else knows they aren't alone, and that maybe I can come alongside and help them. Or even if it's just as simple as writing a blog or sharing something on Instagram, or share like reposting something on Instagram that another organization has posted, like just spreading awareness about this issue, is going to open the eyes of those who think they're alone, and give them the encouragement and really the bravery to step into their own recovery process. That person has to be ready for it, but you plant the seed and hope that it spreads.
Yeah, I always think of that sharing piece as there's an invitational nature to it,
Yeah.
because you're saying, I'm going to be vulnerable here and tell you my story, which has all kinds of brokenness in it, but also has
Yeah.
all kinds of healing in it.
Hmm.
And in order to build a bridge that says, if you'd like to come on this journey with me, I'm available for that. And that's huge. And I don't think there's something powerful about that, because it's personal. If it's just like facts or statistics, or you know just some kind of
Hmm.
quote unquote teaching, it
Yeah.
doesn't have the same impact, I think, which is why I think I love your five sort of stages there, because they build on each other, and that they're interconnected to each other.
Hmm.
So as far as the summit goes, what would be your hope or desired outcome that you'd love to see for people that engage the summit?
Yeah, I started the summit in 2020, back when everybody was home. Because I was getting inundated. I don't know about you, but I was getting inundated, in the hot spot of 2020, of people coming forward saying I need help. I'm isolated. And my addiction's getting worse. I feel totally powerless to this. It's scaring me,
Hmm.
because of just the isolation of quarantine and all of that. And so I just was inspired just to create a virtual space, which has always been what She Recovery is. It's always been a safe and virtual space for women to connect, meet other women, engage, find accountability, support, walk through the recovery process. And so I was like, well, that's no different if we just create a virtual event. And so we created that in 2020, and really the hope then was to connect women, was to get them out of isolation, and into a place where they could surrender, where they could confess, find accountability, take responsibility, ultimately share. And so that really is the hope. It's never been about, okay, let's have the She Summit and then everybody join She Recovery. The idea was that we would bring together various organizations, various speakers, various women from around the world, um, almost to network, almost to,
Hmm.
to connect all the, because, I think I had a conversation with Jessica Harris, a little while back, and she and I kind of started at the same time, and it was so lonely back then.
Oh yeah.
She was blogging and I was blogging. We didn't know about each other, um, and so it's always so interesting when you can bring all of these different organizations together, different women, and be like, did you even know this other person existed? That they're offering this unique thing that maybe She Recovery isn't offering, or vice versa. And so it's a way to give women other resources, other options too, that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise known about. And to hear those stories and takeaways, is pretty powerful.
Yeah. So when this airs, we'll be just over a month away from the summit. So where can our listeners and viewers go to learn more about the summit and get registered?
Yeah, so sherecovery.com is fine. We have a banner there right now, even, that you can go ahead and register. To go directly to the summit to register, we shevirtualsummit.com. And you can just register. It is free to attend live. And so the 5 days is free. If to attend live, you get 24 hours each day to watch all the content. There's obviously upgraded passes that you can purchase for longer term viewer or lifetime viewing of that content. But yeah, and Be Broken's going to be an affiliate for us. So
Yeah, yeah, and we'll put that link as well as the affiliate code for anybody who wants to do that upgrade. There's a discount if you use the affiliate code for that. But uh, Crystal, this is always it's always great to have you on here to talk about this stuff, and I'm so excited for all the resources that you offer to women to really help them in such a safe, shame-free environment to really deal with these secrets and these struggles. And so, thank you for what you're doing and for being with us today.
oh, you're very welcome, and thank you for giving women the space to talk and women the space to share because that isn't always the case. So I appreciate you very much.
Yeah. Well, listeners, viewers, we're going to have a lot of great info in the show notes, and we want to encourage you to definitely go register for the She Summit. It's going to be great. And we are here to help you take your next best step to wholeness in Christ. And so please reach out to us, and we look forward to seeing you back here again next time on the Pure Sex Radio program. Take care.